France's first experiment with fiat money lasted only 5 years, but it left deep scars. In 1715, Scottish financier John Law found a willing succor in French regent Philip d'Orléans. Louis XIV, the Sun King's wars and extravagance, had left France heavily in debt. His successor tried in vain to square the budget, but expenses doubled income. Drastic cuts would have to be made unless another solution was found. John Law, heading up the Banque Générale, started issuing banknotes. He said this would guarantee liquidity and increase commerce. The bank invested in some hot properties, including the Mississippi Company, whose shares traded right here on Rue Quincampoix. Shares jumped, as did the value of the banknotes. And then, in 1718, the Banque Générale became the Banque Royale, and they issued even more shares. The economy boomed as paper wealth became widespread. In 1720, John Law was made Minister of Finance. But that same year, the bubble popped. The shares started to fall. Law's solution was to issue more banknotes to attempt to prop up the share price in rapidly increasing amounts. The notes started to trade at a discount to metal money. The government started to panic. They issued more shares and forced a state pension account to buy more shares. That didn't work. People started to hoard more gold and silver. The state went door to door and confiscated it. In just a few short months, the shares and the banknotes, now held by virtually everyone in France and held in all the pension accounts, became worthless. And the entire country went down the drain. Oh, and by the way, if you really wanted to insult somebody, you called them a banker. (1789). France is in turmoil as the Ancien Regime is overturned and the Assemblée Nationale abolishes feudalism and the privileges of nobility and clergy, declares the rights of man. The Bastille is stormed, and the king is forced to accept a constitutional monarchy. A feeling of freedom and enlightenment sweep the nation. The country's best minds come here to the assembly to make impassioned speeches. But the crushing debt is a problem. Some suggest the issuance of notes to bring back liquidity and prosperity. Resistance is fierce. Jacques Necker, finance minister, argues passionately that printing money would lead down a dangerous path and reminds the Assemblée of the Mississippi bubble and John Law, still in living memory for many. Necker was savagely attacked by the proponents of the assignats. You see, they had a cunning plan. They were going to confiscate property from the church, and they would do a one-time issuance of 400 million livres. You see, this was the collateralized mortgage obligation of its day. Limited, one-time, backed by property. What could possibly go wrong? The debt crisis escalated. Silver disappeared from the market. There was an outcry for paper money. But the defenders of sound money were eloquent. They remembered John Law in the Mississippi Company. Names like Necker, DuPont, Maury. For a whole year, this debate raged between paper money and hard money. The paper money crowd said, it's going to be a one-time deal, fully collateralized. And in the end, by just a handful of votes, 400 million livres of assignats was approved. The second time was easier. The issue was a wonder. The government paid off their expenses, the people got their shiny new assignats, commerce was stimulated, and liquidity increased. However, after just 5 months, the government had spent the money, and since it continued to run a deficit, soon cries were raised for another assignat issue. The second assignat issue only took 3 months to approve, and it was passed by a large majority, 503 to 423. 800 million livres were to be issued. Necker resigned. The royal family fled to Tuileries Palace wearing servant clothes, but was arrested at Varennes. The assignat had already started losing value. Gold, silver, copper were all driven out of circulation. but the people wanted more. In fact, the government issued another 100 million livres of assignats. Prices kept going higher, but people wanted more. It was a vicious cycle. Prices higher, more assignats. Foreigners, exiled nobles, shopkeepers, the church, all were blamed for rising prices. But not the assignat. Speculation was rampant as people tried to protect themselves against the depreciating currency. A new speculator class emerged that actually wanted more of this funny money, and they pressured government to keep the printing presses rolling. On December 1791, a new issue was authorized, another 800 million livres. Meanwhile, the value of the first issue continued to drop from 100 livres nominal to 53 livres. In March, Calvier became the Minister of Finance, promising to speed up printing. In April came the fifth large issue, 500 million livres. But many smaller issues and reissues were simultaneously being carried out. Issue after issue followed through 1792, every couple of months, up to a total of 3.5 billion. Food prices continued to rise. In August of 1792, food riots led to the end of the constitutional monarchy with the Paris Commune insurgency, the assault on the Tuileries Palace, arrest of the royal family, and the Jacobin takeover of the Assemblée. The guillotine started to work overtime. Louis XVI was guillotined on January 1793. War intensified, and the reign of terror really got going. War and money printing got prices skyrocketing. The Jacobins introduced the law of the maximum to put a ceiling on prices. This only led to shopkeepers and shops disappearing because the penalty for violating this law was death. Dragoons went into the countryside looking for food, and the shops here in Paris were attacked by mobs. Meanwhile, assignats kept rolling off the printing press, and all efforts to prop up their value failed. In 1794, assignats issued totaling 7 billion livres. In May of 1795, 10 billion. In July of 1795, 14 billion. Creditors were wiped out, and the debtors rejoiced. In October of 1795, the convention fell and was substituted by the Directory. By then, the guillotine had become a standard part of governmental succession. The Directory tried to replace the, by now almost worthless, assignats with a new issue by a different name, mandat. This was short-lived. Assignats continues to circulate, but were increasingly worthless. The Directory marks the end of the French Revolution. Bone-crunching poverty gripped the nation. They feared the rise of the military, and they were right. In 1799, the coup of Napoleon, who brought in the consulate and then the empire.
While I live, I will never resort to irredeemable paper.
He never did, and the gold franc held until World War I. Seems like when anyone, anywhere, fools with fiat money, catastrophe follows. James, is anyone going to learn from this history?
Well, let's hope this time we learn from history so we don't have to relive it.
Let's go to the cafe and buy some gold. Woo, doggy!